In our headlines at the start, President Yoon Suk-yeol appointed Park Jin to the post of Foreign Minister and Lee Sang-min to that of Interior Minister Thursday morning ahead of a cabinet session to finalize the extra budget proposal. North Korea has confirmed its first COVID-19 outbreak well into the third year of this pandemic. Accordingly, a nationwide lockdown has been imposed. Meanwhile, local elections will take place on June 1st here in South Korea, and they'll coincide with the by-elections to fill up vacant seats in the parliament. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching the Daily Report. It's Thursday afternoon, May 12th, here in capital Seoul. President Yoon Suk-yeol appointed Park Jin to the post of Foreign Minister and Lee Sang-min to that of Interior Minister earlier on this Thursday. Now, the move seeks to meet the requirement for the new administration's first cabinet meeting, which will take place in about an hour. There needs to be at least 11 ministerial-level officials to convene a cabinet session, and now Yoon has 10, including himself. He'll need one more official from the previous Moon administration. The upcoming cabinet meeting will seek to approve the new government's extra budget proposal worth at least 33 trillion won. On the pandemic front, authorities here have recorded a retreat in their daily COVID-19 tally on this Thursday. Caseloads today stand on the 35,000 level. Now, in light of the declining trend, the new government is looking into a possible roadmap to declaring, that is, an endemic phase of this pandemic. Such a declaration is also expected to lift quarantine requirements for COVID-19 patients. Officials have tentatively set May 23rd as a possible date for a new normal, as it marks some 4 weeks since a host of restrictions were eased, including the outdoor mask mandate. Meanwhile, across the border in North Korea, authorities there have confirmed their first COVID-19 outbreak. Now, the confirmation comes well into the third year of this pandemic. Our Peunji has details.
Nearly 2.5 years since the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the world, North Korea on Thursday reported its first case of the virus. Calling the situation a major national emergency, the North state-run news agency KCNA said there was a hole in its emergency quarantine procedures that have been keeping the nation safe over the past 2 years and 3 months, since February 2020. It said that authorities concluded samples collected from patients with fever in Pyongyang were identical to Omicron. But the state media did not provide further details on case numbers or possible sources of infection. The KCNA said its leader Kim Jong-un chaired a Workers' Party meeting to discuss the regime's response to the first outbreak of the virus. Kim ordered all cities to strictly lock down their regions and said emergency reserve medical supplies would be mobilized. He also called for officials to stably control and manage the spread of the virus and quickly heal infected people to eliminate the source of transmission as soon as possible. To prevent COVID-19 from entering the regime, North Korea had closed its borders to nearly all trade and visitors for more than 2 years, which further shocked an already damaged economy. Up to now, the North had never confirmed a single COVID-19 infection and has declined offers of shipments of vaccines from the COVAX Global COVID-19 Vaccine Sharing Program. Peunji, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, come May 16th, that would be next Monday, travelers will no longer have to wear face masks at airports or on flights in Europe. The health protocol was issued on Wednesday by the EU's Aviation Safety Agency and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. Authorities have nonetheless advised for the adorning of face masks to and from countries that still mandate them on public transportation. The recent move comes in reflection of Europe's high vaccination rate as well as natural immunity, and in light of the ease in restrictions in many countries. In other news, the U.S. is calling for a tangible shift to action from inaction by the UN Security Council in response to North Korea's blatant displays of defiance. Our Min Suk-yeol has more on these remarks amid Moscow's and Beijing's calls for restraint.
The United States says the UN Security Council should not stay silent any longer as North Korea appears to be preparing for yet another provocation. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, said silence and restraint have not worked and stressed it's time for action.
Clearly, silence and restraint have not worked. In fact, the exact opposite has happened. While the Security Council has remained silent, the DPRK continued to escalate with repeated launches and threatening rhetoric.
Her remarks were made Wednesday at a Security Council meeting to discuss North's latest ballistic missile launches. The ambassador specifically called out China and Russia for opposing further sanctions on North Korea, saying they've blocked every attempt to enforce and update the sanctions list for the past 4 years. The U.S. pushed for a collective voice in denouncing Pyongyang's unlawful behavior, supported by its allies South Korea and Japan, who also condemned the regime's continued threats.
The Republic of Korea condemns in the strongest terms the DPRK's recent ballistic missile launches, which constitute a flagrant violation of multiple Security Council resolutions.
North Korea has publicly declared that it will implement its 5-year plan, which includes a new solid-fuel ICBM and tactical nuclear weapons. The right message to discourage such potential developments and urge them to come back to diplomatic dialogue can only be sent through a new resolution.
Washington wants the Security Council to vote in May on a U.S.-drafted resolution to further sanction the North. But veto-wielding powers China and Russia are against this and instead have long pushed for the Council to ease such measures. China's UN Ambassador Park Jin said the U.S.-drafted resolution was not an appropriate way to address the situation. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has reaffirmed its commitment to work closely with South Korea's new government to address North Korea's threats. State Department spokesperson Ned Price stressed the Washington-Seoul alliance is rooted in close friendship and said it would work with its allies to achieve the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Earlier, the State Department warned the North may be preparing for a 7th nuclear test as early as this month. Min Suk-yeol, Arirang News.
And an international entity on human rights is calling on President Yoon Suk-yeol to, quote, fully bring into effect all provisions of the North Korea Human Rights Act. In a recent statement to the Voice of America, the Human Rights Watch pointed out that the act itself had been passed by South Korea's National Assembly back in the year 2016, but was never fully implemented. The entity alleged that the former Moon administration had failed to address North Korea's human rights abuses. Accordingly, it has urged President Yoon to appoint an ambassador-level envoy to address such abuses with the international community. Back on the local front, Finance and Economy Minister Choo Kyung-ho has pledged to place priority on fighting inflation and spurring economic growth. Our Ji-young has more on his intentions.
The Yoon administration's economic team is now in place, led by the new finance minister, Choo Kyung-ho. Choo was officially inaugurated on Wednesday as Minister of Economy and Finance, a role where he'll double as Deputy Prime Minister. As a former Vice Finance Minister and Head of Financial Policy at the Financial Services Commission, Choo played a key role in designing Yoon's major economic policies. In his inaugural address, he shared his views of the economic challenges Korea faces, both at home and abroad. He emphasized the need to stabilize prices and people's livelihoods as the top priority, saying the government should come up with policies to provide relief to those hit by the pandemic. To do this, Choo said, the government will immediately form an emergency economic task force to closely monitor and counteract economic challenges. Choo also said the cycle of low economic growth should be broken by a revitalization led by the private sector. And he called for drastic reforms of regulations to help companies create more quality jobs. Stronger policies are needed also, he said, to address other economic issues including Korea's low birth rate, aging society, and regional imbalances, and to protect the socially vulnerable. Ji-young, Arirang News.
On the political front, local elections are poised to take place in about 3 weeks, and they'll coincide with the by-elections for vacant seats within the parliament. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Just 2 days after President Yoon Suk-yeol took office, things are heating up once again on the country's political scene, with nationwide local elections on the horizon. On Thursday, candidates registered officially for the June 1st local election. Most voters across South Korea will be voting in 7 different elections. These include the chief of their province or metropolitan city, education superintendents, their mayors, city council members, constituency council members, as well as the proportional representatives of these districts. This is the first nationwide election of President Yoon's term, and the results could change the course of the administration as the terms for these positions last 4 years. The biggest battlefronts are in the capital region, with a race for the mayor of Seoul between former chairman of Democratic Party of Korea Song Young-gil and the incumbent mayor Oh Se-hun from the People Power Party. For the governor of Gyeonggi-do Province, former presidential candidate Kim Dong-yeon from the DP and former lawmaker and President Yoon's spokesperson Kim Eun-hye face off. Running concurrently with local elections will be by-elections with even bigger names on the ballot. Racing for a seat representing a district in Incheon City will be Lee Jae-myung himself in a bid to fill the vacancy caused by Song Young-gil's run for Seoul mayor, facing off Yoon Hyung-sun from the PPP as the party nominated a local to rival Lee, who has no familiar connections to the region. For the other parliamentary seat vacancy caused by Kim Eun-hye's run for the governor of Gyeonggi-do will be former presidential candidate and Yoon's transition committee chairman An Cheol-soo, who will be facing off with the DP's candidate Kim Byung-kwan. Both of them come from a software industry background, as the district is home to many South Korean IT firms. This will be the third major election during the COVID-19 pandemic. While no major information has been given in terms of virus prevention measures and how to accommodate the patients who wish to vote, how the new administration alters the current measures by the end of May will decide the process. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Up next, we bring you the local forecast. I have Choi Ji-an standing by. Ji-an, what is the latest on the weather front?
Good afternoon, Sunny. Today we will see big differences between the east and west of the country. Early summer-like temperatures will be prevalent in western areas, with the mercury hitting 27 or 28 degrees. On the other hand, as you can see, it's almost 10 degrees cooler in eastern regions. Overall, skies are overcast and slight drizzle is in the forecast on the south coast and Jeju. And there's a chance of pockets of heavy rain in parts of Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsang-nam-do provinces later today. So you might need an umbrella on your way back home. Highs in western regions are summer-like due to the strong sunshine, so be mindful of the high UV index and ozone levels. And refrain from going out in the afternoon if it's unnecessary. Now that eastern regions are much cooler, you will need to bundle up later today. That's all from me for now. I'm Choi Ji-an, and back to you, Sunny.
Right, and that ends part 1 of the Daily Report. Part 2 is coming your way in a few minutes with details on China's zero-COVID strategy.
Arirang, what matters?
On Viewpoint today, we take a look at the impact of China's zero-COVID strategy on a host of international sports events that had been scheduled to take place in China. For more on the situation, I have Yoo Ji-ho live on the line. Chiu, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me today.
I also have Jonathan Chang joining this session virtually. Jonathan, it's good to have you on as well.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Jonathan, we'll start with you then. Let's start with a few words on the COVID-19 situation there in Beijing and efforts to contain it then.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I hope my connection is holding up here. But yeah, in Beijing, things are definitely starting to get worrisome here. Obviously, we've had the Shanghai lockdown for more than 6 weeks already with a big outbreak of Omicron. The question now is whether or not Beijing, the capital, can contain the virus without a full lockdown. So what we've seen so far is we've seen half measures. They've shut the schools, they've shut subway stations, they've restricted people's movements between different parts of the city, but still no hard lockdown yet.
Right, and while there are no hard lockdowns as of yet, though, Gio, China's zero-COVID strategy has led to the postponement of the Asian Games, which was slated to kick off in September this year. Was this postponement expected, or was it a rather abrupt announcement that came late last week, Gio?
I don't think this was a surprise. I think the only surprise might be the fact that it didn't come sooner, the announcement of the postponement. Jonathan just talked about the outbreak of the COVID-19, the situation in the city of Shanghai, which is quite close to Hangzhou, the host city of the Asian Games. So the fact that the decision came 4 months before the scheduled opening ceremony, that close to the competition, maybe the timing was maybe a bit of a surprise just because of the fact that it didn't come sooner. But I think over the past 2 years, we've probably all grown accustomed to seeing international sporting events being canceled or postponed. China has had a lot of other smaller scale competitions being postponed or canceled before, leading up to this latest decision. So no, I don't think this was a surprise at all.
Right. Jonathan, China did host, though, the Winter Olympics in February and the Paralympics in March there in Beijing. How are pundits there explaining the postponement of the Asian Games?
Well, I mean, they're not talking about it too much. I mean, obviously, it doesn't look good for China to not be able to stage these games. The Olympics were different because at that time, Omicron was not spreading as quickly across China. And of course, the Olympic Games are the most prestigious in all of sports. So that was an event that I think for Xi Jinping, the leader here, this was not something he could compromise on. He had Vladimir Putin flying into Beijing to attend the opening ceremony. And of course, it was just a big moment for China. So I think with Hangzhou and with the Asian Games, I think the thought is Omicron is more serious. Hangzhou is, as Ji-ho said, very close to Shanghai, which is where most of the trouble is right now. And I think they just decided something has to give here, and we're okay with this, because I think the more important thing is keeping their COVID-0 policy alive.
Right. And that being said then, Chio, what has been the regional response to this postponement, including here in South Korea?
I don't think there's been any official reaction from the South Korean, at least the Olympic Committee, the top sporting body, which I find a little curious, because right after the Tokyo Olympics got postponed, about 1 year ahead of the scheduled opening day, there was an official statement from the Korean Sporting Olympic Committee saying they supported that decision, they respected that decision. There's not been a similar type of statement coming from the National Olympic Committee. But some of the athletes have spoken up about their missed opportunity to compete in the Asian Games this year, how they were disappointed that they weren't going to have the chance to do it this year, and how maybe some of them might have lost a little bit of a sense of a purpose with the competition gone from the calendar. But some of them have experienced a similar situation with Tokyo Games being postponed by a year from 2020 to 2021. These are both summer sporting competitions. Some of the athletes will compete, in both events, and some of them anyway, have already had that experience of having to wait at least another year to get into these Asian Games.
Right. Jonathan, meanwhile, clips of people being dragged from their homes by health workers in hazmat suits were shared on Chinese social platforms this past Sunday. What more can you tell us about the public response to the Chinese authorities' perhaps stern response to COVID-19?
Well, there's no question that it has sparked quite a backlash, and frustrations in Shanghai are very high. I mean, you can imagine that if you were stuck at home for 6 weeks or even longer with no real timeline for when you'll be able to get out. Keep in mind that many of these people were struggling to get food in those early days because they couldn't go out to supermarkets, and delivery services had basically stopped working for a little while. People were initially told that this lockdown would last perhaps 4 days. They were expecting maybe a little bit longer, but now we're now a month and a half in, and we don't know when this is going to end. So you can imagine if you're in that position, and especially if you have young children in your household, or if you're living alone, or if you're older, or if you have a medical condition, this is a really, really difficult time for a lot of people. And Shanghai is China's most prosperous city. This is not a place where people expected to see these sorts of scenes. And I think it's just a lot of frustration boiling over. And I think part of it is because the policies have not been seen as very transparent or very consistent. And so I think that's really the challenge for China, is whether or not they can hold on through all of this, and whether the people of Shanghai can stick it out through all of this, because it's not easy.
Right, I'm sure it's not. Jonathan, also on the subject of China's policy, I'd like to get in a very quick question on a diplomatic question to you here. Some pundits in the country here in South Korea claim that the attendance of Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan at the inauguration of President Yoon Suk-yeol is tangible reflection, perhaps, of Beijing's hopes to bolster ties with Seoul under the Yoon administration. What appears to be the general view among pundits there in China?
Well, I think the view in China, or at least the pundits here, is that China right now is feeling a little bit more diplomatically isolated than it has. Even if you compare it to a year or two ago, because, of course, the U.S. And many of its Western allies have taken a harder line towards China. Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has not helped either, because it's only served to highlight that geopolitical distinction between Russia and China on the one hand, and the Western countries on the other. South Korea, of course, is seen as closer to the U.S. camp, and with Yoon Suk-yeol, of course, he's also a conservative. So I think while it may not be that China has hopes that South Korea will move closer to its own position, it may be hoping that South Korea won't move even closer to the U.S. position, which would, given the global geopolitical situation, would add another challenge for Beijing.
Right. Choo, back on the Asian Games then, the event typically attracts more than 10,000 athletes. And that being said, I assume the ripple effects of this postponement are proving to be quite profound. What do you say?
Well, no question about that. People outside of Asia might not be too familiar with the Asian Games, but like you said, every competition attracts 10,000 plus athletes. In terms of their size, it rivals the Summer Olympics. And this is a huge event. And obviously having this being pushed back, most likely by 1 year, does have a lot of ripple effects across the continent. Just look at the Korean situation. I mentioned how some of the athletes were disappointed that they were going to get to compete. And, look at some of the Summer Olympic athletes that, they were having great seasons in their respective sports, and they were peaking, they were in great form, they were riding high on their confidence that they were going to be able to win medals in Asian Games, and now they're going to have to wait and see how or when this competition will be held again. So, there's that aspect of that, and also the qualifying processes for the national team athletes. Nothing has been finalized yet, but I think out of respect, the Korean Olympic Committee will hold we'll go back to the drawing board and hold the qualifying events all over again. So, there's no guarantee that someone who qualified for the Asian Games this year will make it back next year. So I guess that's to ensure maybe a little bit of fairness, to ensure that they're going to take someone who's performing best in 2023 rather than who was performing well in 2022. But there's a lot of headaches in terms of scheduling these events. And also, with the Paris Olympics scheduled for 2024, there will be some Olympic qualifying events internationally later in 2023. So potentially those events might overlap with the Asian Games in Hangzhou if they do take place in 2023 as well. So again, I don't envy those people who have to make those schedules. There's going to be a lot of headaches, a lot of logistical issues to deal with. But I think it's not going to be an easy situation for everybody involved in the postponement situation.
Right, sure. It's looking to be a very daunting task then. Jonathan, despite the expansion in district lockdowns over there in Beijing, authorities appear to be avoiding a complete lockdown like the one currently in place in Shanghai. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Beijing being the capital does have different significance for the country. Obviously, it's the home of the leadership, and it's the home of a lot of elites. Now, of course, people didn't think that Shanghai could be locked down. So that's why everyone here in Beijing, and I hear it in conversations all around me, are trying to decide whether or not they want to stick around in Beijing while you can get out. I mean, that's one thing people are discussing. And a lot of people are asking, how much longer can we keep this COVID-0 policy going for? And, yesterday you had Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, starting to raise those questions too, and openly asking whether China needs to change its policy. And China shot back and said that these were irresponsible remarks. And they said, we are going to continue with this policy. So I think a lot of people right now are just looking at the government's view and looking at what we know of Omicron, and we know how transmissible it is, and wondering how that's going to play out over the next few weeks and months.
Right. Meanwhile, Choo, the Asian Games are not the only games to be affected by China's zero-COVID strategy. The Asian Youth Games, as well as the World University Games, which are all scheduled to take place in China, have either been cancelled altogether, that is, or postponed. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. With the Asian Youth Games, it would have been the third edition of the competition. It was scheduled to be run from December 20th to 28th in Shantou, China. And the Olympic Council of Asia and the local organizing committee decided to actually cancel this event. It had been postponed once already, and this time they decided to cancel it. So the next Asian Youth Games will be held in 2025 in Uzbekistan. Now, with the World University Games, the International University Sports Federation, or FISU, this event was supposed to take place in the summer of 2021, and it was rescheduled because the Tokyo Olympics got pushed back from 2020 to 2021 in summer months. So, and then now they've decided to postpone it once again. They decided they reached the decision based on the uncertainty over the current situation regarding the virus. So, again, understandable moves. The safety of the athletes and all the participants obviously comes first, and they're going to worry about maybe hosting these events a little later on.
Jonathan, like you mentioned earlier, there has been a tense exchange of words between Beijing and the global health body, with the latter, like you said earlier, claiming that zero COVID is unsustainable, and China accusing the WHO of irresponsible remarks. Now, that being said, how are authorities, or have authorities there in China, shared any plans on how they plan to continue to commit to a zero COVID policy while perhaps keeping their economy afloat?
Well, they actually haven't talked too much about striking that balance. I mean, one thing they can do, of course, is to stimulate the economy by either handing out money or giving tax breaks or doing other things to try and keep things going. But the ultimate problem is that if people can't leave their homes, then a lot of economic activity simply can't happen. And so that's really the challenge here. And a lot of people are asking, at what point does China feel comfortable, changing its policy? And one of the questions comes down to vaccination, because China has said that many of its elderly people have not been vaccinated and therefore are not going to be okay if they were to open things up, which then begs the next question: what are they doing to increase the elderly vaccination rate? China also doesn't have any mRNA vaccines here. It only has domestically made older technology vaccines, and so they're trying to develop their own. But there's also the question of whether or not China might be open to importing foreign mRNA vaccines. But we haven't seen any movement on that front either. So right now, there are a lot more questions than answers about what China is going to do exactly with its COVID policy.
Right, I see. And Choo, finally, I believe organizers of the Asian Games have yet to announce a new date. What are your prospects on this?
I think the speculation is that it's going to be held next year. Earlier, even before this, the Olympic Council of Asia had been hoping to move the Asian Games to odd-numbered years, to avoid being in the same year as the Winter Games and the FIFA World Cup. 2017 Asian Games would have been held in Vietnam. The country gave up on that rights to host the games, and it moved to Indonesia, which ended up, staging it in 2018 in even numbered years. So, with this, I think they might just permanently move the Asian Games to, at least the summer version anyway, to the odd number years in 2023.
Right, I see. All right, Choo, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Jonathan over in Beijing, thank you for being with us as well.
Thank you.
On the export front, overseas shipments of South Korea's ICT products appear to be defying global risk factors. Exports last month hit a fresh high. Our Lee Ji-yoon has those figures.
It's a record after record set for South Korea's ICT exports. The Trade Ministry announced on Thursday that the country's ICT exports in April jumped nearly 17% on year to reach $19.9 billion. That's the largest for the month of April since the records began in 1996. Korea's ICT exports showed a double-digit growth for the 13th straight month. Semiconductors were up 16% on year, exceeding the $10 billion mark for the 12th consecutive month. Computers and peripheral devices also jumped nearly 60% on year.
The reason that ICT exports are continuing to rise is because countries around the world are adopting 5G networks, and that raises the demand for semiconductors.
ICT exports to other countries like Vietnam, Japan, and the U.S. all rose as well, and what was notable was China. Despite the country's consumer spending falling, shipments to China still jumped by over 4% on year. However, an expert believes numbers might be a little different in the coming months.
By next quarter, the COVID lockdown in Shanghai may lead to a drop in Apple smartphone supplies, which means the demand for semiconductors might go down as well. However, semiconductor exports will stay strong.
Meanwhile, South Korea's exports for the first 10 days of May jumped nearly 30% from the same period a year earlier, thanks to rising demand for chips and petroleum products. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
The rise of consumer prices over in the U.S. slowed down in April, hinting that the worst may be over, but inflation there continues to simmer. Our Kim Yo-sun explains.
U.S. consumer prices rose at an annual pace of 8.3% in April, higher than economists expected. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, a broad-based measure of prices for goods and services, moderated for the first time in 8 months. The rate cooled slightly compared to its peak of 8.5% seen in March. But it was still slightly higher than an 8.1% rise forecast by economists. It was also close to being at the highest level since the summer of 1982. Removing volatile food and energy prices, the so-called core CPI still rose 6.2%. To fight inflation, which has been the single biggest threat to post-pandemic recovery, the Federal Reserve has already pushed forward with 2 interest rate hikes and have pledged more until inflation comes down to the bank's 2% goal. The inflation reading is important given that this data largely determines the Federal Reserve's direction on raising interest rates. Against its backdrop, U.S. stocks retreated Wednesday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average recording a drop for 5 consecutive days. Led by a sell-off in tech, the Nasdaq Composite ended the day down 3.2%, while the S&P 500 shed 1.6%. The benchmark 10-year Treasury note yield dropped from more than a 3-year high to below 3%. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Also in the U.S., intelligence officials believe Russia may resort to the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Our Shin Yeon has more on this unsettling outlook.
The war in Ukraine is now in its 11th week. Many believe it'll go on even longer now that Russia has shifted most of its focus to eastern Ukraine, specifically the Donbas region, which includes 2 Russian-backed separatist republics in Luhansk and Donetsk. A top intelligence official in the U.S. predicts that Russia may go beyond capturing the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine.
That President Putin would probably only authorize the use of nuclear weapons if he perceived an existential threat to the Russian state or regime, but we will remain vigilant in monitoring every aspect of Russia's strategic nuclear forces.
Russia hasn't issued an official response, but on Monday, on its biggest patriotic holiday, Victory Day, solidified its stance that the war is to continue. Meanwhile, the U.S. House has passed a $40 billion bill to make it easier for Washington to provide humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. President Joe Biden had urged the Congress to quickly approve this new bill, as the world is paying close attention to whether the West will be able to expand its military alliance against Russia. Finland and Sweden are to decide this week whether to become NATO members. As the war rages on, the bodies of 44 civilians have been found in the rubble of a collapsed building in the city of Izium, which had been seized by Russia in early April. But Ukraine says it is stopping any further advances from Russian forces. Ukrainian troops also reportedly recaptured the settlements north and northeast of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. 신예은, Arirang News.
Disney Plus secured 7.9 million new subscribers during the first 3 months of this year. 137.7 million people are now signed up, marking a 33% on-year rise. Quarterly findings released Wednesday surpassed growth forecasts of 5.2 million new subscribers. According to Reuters, Disney's latest growth has eased concerns about the fate of streaming video platforms, which had been prompted after Netflix disclosed last month that it had lost subscribers in the first quarter. Market insiders reportedly believe Disney Plus could soon expand further into Netflix's market share. On the entertainment front, a K-pop singer from Oklahoma has become the first winner of a Eurovision-inspired singing contest over in the US. Our Chung Eun-ju has the highlights.
K-pop singer Alexa has won the very first American Song Contest, a spin-off of Eurovision. Alexa beat 9 other artists, including Grammy winner Michael Bolton. This is the first time a K-pop artist has won a large-scale audition show held in the United States. NBC's American Song Contest is a music competition that premiered in March this year and wrapped up its 8-week run on Monday, May 9th. Hosted by Snoop Dogg and Kelly Clarkson, 56 artists from U.S. states and territories competed against each other to win the title of Best Original Song. The voting process was similar to that of the Eurovision Song Contest, which combines professional jury points with public points to decide the winner. Alexa represented her home state, Oklahoma, and triumphed by receiving the highest score of 710 points with her song Wonderland, a song she had performed in South Korea only on Arirang TV's Simply K-pop show. Alexa scored especially high in the public vote category and said it felt like her brain had exploded when she heard the results. Alexa, whose full name is Alexandra Christine Schneiderman, is a K-pop singer based in South Korea. Her music career began in 2016 when appearing on the online audition show Rising Legends and rose to fame in 2018 as a contestant of Mnet's Produce 48. Her first single, Bomb, was released in 2019. Alexa had said on multiple occasions that she wanted to show people in the US what makes K-pop. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
As part of its latest cultural campaign, South Korea is seeking to better promote its traditional architecture in the form of the Hanok overseas. Our Cho Sung-min has more on this project.
While much of Korea's culture and heritage has been embraced around the globe more than ever over the last couple of years, Hanok, or homes built in Korean traditional architectural style, is one of the new projects South Korea is looking to use to further promote its national brand. From their distinctive structural features to a wide range of color schemes, Hanok are built with emphasis on using the natural surroundings as part of the grand design. As proof of their rising popularity overseas, new Hanok villages are being built in cities across Vietnam and Algeria near South Korean cultural promotion centers. These Korean cultural complexes will have Hanok-style community centers, gardens, daycare facilities, and other public venues.
People are particularly drawn by the beauty of Hanok's curvy roofs, and they like them because they are eco-friendly. They also seem to consider Hanok not as architecture but art.
In the United States, a new project has recently broken ground in Georgia for the construction of a Hanok village, which will include around 40 traditional-style buildings. It will resemble the famous Hanok village in the South Korean city of Jeonju.
It'll be more than just a building or two, as the whole town will be built around that style. It'll be vital in helping Korean culture cement its place within the US.
Experts are forecasting that the number of global Hanok projects will increase as the nation continues its effort to further highlight the beauty of Korean culture. 조성민, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The United Nations have swiftly condemned the killing of a journalist in the occupied West Bank. This follows a raid conducted by the Israeli military on Wednesday, where an Al Jazeera reporter was shot dead in the city of Jenin. According to reports, 51-year-old Shireen Abu Akleh was wearing a press vest clearly marking her as a journalist, but was shot anyway. The US ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, called her death horrifying and stressed the need for a clear investigation. That sentiment was echoed by the White House. Abu Akleh was reporting on the ongoing slew of arrests by the Israeli military in a bid to stop deadly Arab attacks in Israel. The killing of the reporter has inflamed tensions in the conflict, with Palestinians and a local news channel accusing Israel of killing her. However, Israel's leader claims she was likely hit by indiscriminate shooting from Palestinians. The Polish embassy in Moscow had cleaners remove red paint from its walls on Wednesday, following a suspected retaliatory action for an incident that happened in Warsaw 2 days prior. The perpetrator behind the latest incident has yet to be apprehended. On Monday, the Russian ambassador to Poland was doused in red paint as he visited the Soviet military cemetery in Warsaw. That incident sparked a furious reaction from Moscow, which demanded a formal apology and summoned Poland's ambassador to Russia to lodge a protest. However, Poland's foreign minister said the Russian envoy had been warned by Polish authorities that visiting the cemetery risked provoking an angry reaction, but he went along regardless. Thousands of angry young voters gathered in front of the Philippines Elections Commission building on Tuesday to protest the recent election that saw Ferdinand Marcos Jr. elected as the country's next president. The son of a former dictator, his victory was marred by thousands of reports of election-related anomalies since Monday's vote. Malfunctioning voting machines were one of the biggest complaints, with an election watchdog saying the issue had severely impaired the electoral process. Despite this, Marcos gained around 31 million votes according to preliminary tallies, more than twice as many as his closest rival. Officials say the margin was so large it could not have been swayed by fraud. After more than 20 years, Apple is discontinuing its iconic iPod. The device was once the face of portable music and a driving force behind one of the world's biggest companies. According to Apple on Tuesday, the only version of this device still on sale, the Ipod Touch, will remain on shelves until supplies run out. Since its launch in 2001, the iPod took on a storm of competing music players before being eclipsed by smartphones, music streaming, and the rise of the iPhone. Since its launch, the iPod has undergone a series of transformations, including the introduction of a scroll wheel, increased capacity to 1,000 songs, and a 10-hour battery life. A passenger with no flight experience successfully landed a small Cessna 208 plane after the aircraft's pilot lost consciousness on a return flight from the Bahamas. According to an air traffic control recording, the incident occurred on Tuesday morning local time when one of the plane's two passengers called Florida's Fort Pierce Air Traffic Control to brief them on the situation. Thankfully, a 20-year veteran in air traffic control, Robert Morgan, was on hand to help guide the 9-seater plane to the ground. Using his skills as a flight instructor, Morgan gave step-by-step instructions to secure a safe landing. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Thursday afternoon. You might have noticed conditions are completely different from west to east. Early summer-like temperatures will be prevalent in western areas with the mercury hitting 27 or 28 degrees. On the other hand, as you can see, it's almost 10 degrees cooler in eastern regions.
Overall, skies are overcast and slight drizzle is in the forecast on the south coast and Jeju. And there's a chance of pockets of heavy rain in parts of Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsangnam-do provinces, later today. So you might need an umbrella on your way back home. Highs in western regions are summer-like due to strong sunshine, so be mindful of the high UV index and ozone level, and refrain from going out in the afternoon unless necessary. Now that eastern regions are much cooler, you will need to bundle up later today. Jeju is expected to have some rain tomorrow, and temperatures will be back to normal as a cold air mass approaches the country this weekend. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And that is all we have for this edition of the Daily Report. See you on Friday. Thank you for now.
What do I do with this kimchi? Ah, got it. I am going to make kimchi jjigae, braised kimchi with delicious pork. Got my veggies and condiments ready. Sliced onions, crushed garlic, and so on. Gotta grill the meat first to keep the juice intact. Nice and crispy. Yum! This recipe is so simple. Just follow my lead. Oh, kimchi juice? It does wonders to this dish. Don't put too much seasoning, because kimchi already has enough flavor. All done? Then keep it on here for 2 hours. Voila! Wow, so soft. finish off with sliced green onions. And just simply enjoy it with a hot bowl of rice. Absolutely amazing!